Hello there. Welcome to Afternoons with Ed. Here's your host, Ed King.
Good afternoon. It's good to be with you again. I'm doing my favorite thing. I'm before an audience. I love be before people. It's a character defect, I guess, but I love it. What I want to do today is talk about something that I think most people today, because they're not as old as I am, have little or no knowledge of the so-called Great Depression. People are worried about the recession that we're in now, but they fail to realize that this is always going to happen in a capitalistic society. It's just part of the thing. This is nothing brand new. It's cyclical. It happens. In my opinion, the reason it happens is because people get too outward with things. Let's talk about what brought on the Great Depression. It wasn't the first depression we've ever had in this country. We made a lot of mistakes in the 1920s because we had just fought and won a war relatively easily compared to the way war is fought today. But it was a very ebullient society. It was the time of the flapper and bootlegging. We passed the amendment to the Constitution and made sale of alcohol illegal. Of course, this led to some dire things, and of course it was later repealed during the Great Depression. But it was a time where the capitalism went wild. Wall Street went wild. The guy that shined somebody's shoes, he was investing in the stock market. It was crazy, because they were allowed to invest with as little as 10%. In other words, that's all the margin you needed. You had to have 10% down, the rest was borrowed. And so you were playing with other people's money, not your own, and the 90% of it. This, of course, led to a lot of abuses, and of course, the country went wild during the 20s. And of course, the unthinkable happened in 1929. I'm trying to think of the great financial wizard or whatever he was, who had stopped the similar depression in the 1900s, and by buying a lot of stock and bolstering the market. Well, it had gotten beyond that where it couldn't be done anymore. It wasn't enough. He tried it and it didn't work. Nobody ever said how much he lost on this whole deal, but of course he had lots to lose. But we went headlong into this. We had three kind of hands-off of things presidents. We had Warren G. Harding, who used to be rated the worst president in the history of the United States. They've changed that now. Now they decided Andrew Johnson was even worse. That was Lincoln's vice president, who took over when Lincoln was assassinated. And then we had Calvin Coolidge, who practically did nothing in office, except look silly a couple of times. He was dressed up in an Indian headgear. And then Herbert Hoover, who was said to be a very intellectual man. He didn't. He said things like prosperity is just around the corner after the Depression hit, which was in it was October 24th of 1929 when the first thing hit, and then it really went really bad the next month in November. And the country was in a terrible turmoil. There was no taking care of people in any way or shape. There was no social issues being addressed. There was no such thing as relief or anything like that. And it was a time when it was not only a depression of the economy, but it was a depression of the mind, because people could see no way out of the trench they were in. The automobile industry, for example, went down to about 40% or less of total production it had been enjoying. This, of course, put a lot of auto workers out of work. They were not unionized at that time. At that time, the only unions in existence, as I recall, were from history, not from personal knowledge, but were the trade unions, plumbers, the electricians, and so forth. The people who worked in heavy industry were not organized labor at that time. So there was it was a bad time. So what happened? Hoover had one good idea. He started. I can't remember the initials now, but it was something to kind of bolster the banking industry. But what happened was that the public lost all faith in these two things that they had a lot of faith in, and that is banks. Banks were failing. The stock market, which was being run by thieves of one sort or another, and it was a terrible time. It was people were out of work. I can recall I was a child at that time. I can remember 1932 when the Depression. I was 10 years old, and the Depression was really bad, and people were walking the streets, and they were homeless. There were what they called Hoovervilles. These were shanty towns that were built on the outskirts. Of course, they wouldn't be able to do that, especially in Sarasota. God forbid you erect a tent here if you're a homeless person, which is a whole new subject, which someday maybe I'll get into, is our treatment of homeless people in this area. But so the public kind of unanimously rejected Hoover and his ideas, and they elected FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, it's interesting that his branch of the family were Democrats, and his forerunner as the youngest president ever to serve in the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, was a Republican. But they both had the same ideas in mind. Teddy did a great job of repressing the excesses of the financial industry, or whatever you want to call it. And they really had the same idea about social issues. It's pretty interesting. Teddy Roosevelt is one of the highest ranked presidents. He and another Republican, interestingly, naturally, Abraham Lincoln. We don't know what Lincoln would have done about all this, but Roosevelt was elected by a large majority. He had a predominantly Democratic Congress at that time, not completely. There were still the old diehards that were obstructionists, as we have today. Today we're witnessing the most obstructive Congress I can recall in my lifetime. So Roosevelt came in, and the first thing he did is he got the banking industry reconstructed. He called a bank holiday, and all the banks in the United States were closed, and those that were not economically sound never reopened. But this straightened out the banking industry at the time. And the next thing he did, he started in on social issues. And now he didn't just immediately start a relief program. What he started was two great projects. One which was ultimately called the Works Progress Administration of the WPA, which was a lot of jokes about it. And yes, sure, it wasn't, these weren't the best and fastest workers in the world mostly. But these people were given, that couldn't find employment elsewhere, were given a job, and it was a very low-paying job, and it was mostly manual labor. Well, in the little town I lived, Independence, Ohio, just south of Cleveland, they built a new baseball field for the high school, and they dug a basement underneath the town hall. I forget what else they did, but they did. They built dams and they built roads and they did all sorts of things. Schools. They built a lot of schools. I forgot about that. And so this put some people to work. And he did another thing. He started the Civilian Conservation Corps. This is where young men would go off to work in reforestation and all sorts of reclaiming of things that had been devastated by industry in the past. I recall one time we were on bivouac during World War II in central Illinois, and there was an area there that had been turned at one point into a total desert. And they had reforested that by that time because some time had gone by. And there were young trees in there where we bivouacked. But there was still some sand dunes there. The Conservation Corps, they put the young men in Army-type uniforms, khaki uniforms, and they did these reclamation projects and did a lot of stuff to help the environment at that time. And they were given a small salary, but a certain percentage of this wage that they got was sent home to their families. I don't remember the figures, but of course it would sound ridiculous today that the amount of money we're talking about was so little bit. But you got to remember that in those days, a dollar bought an awful lot of stuff. So these two things helped the economy. He tried to institute what was called the National Recovery Act, and you'll still see this on the foreground of old movies that are shown on television, especially on Turner Classic. You'll see the NRA. He got beat down on that. He tried one nefarious trick. He tried to pack the Supreme Court. He wanted to appoint some more Supreme Court justices because the ones that were in there were of the opposite political faith, and they were very obstructive at that time. But he didn't get that through Congress. That one failed on him. The Depression never really was completely licked, only partially licked until the war came along in 1940 and 41, and at that point, of course, the industry were making war materials. But living during the Great Depression as a kid, I have the feeling, and I've said this before in one of my other programs, I had the feeling that people were happier then, despite the fact that they were poor and no longer hungry. There were, as I started to say earlier, there were a lot of people on the road. I can remember all kinds of people trucking through our small town, trekking, I guess I should say, through our small town. I even remember a guy that had a weird outfit on. I don't know what he was. From somewhere in the Middle East, I guess, and he had some kind of a strange, huge instrument over his shoulder. The Depression, for some people, it didn't really exist because they had jobs that were indispensable. Like I lived 2 doors away from the blacksmith shop. And Mr. Hamburger was his name, was an older gentleman with all kinds of muscles. And, of course, he was in big demand because most of the farmers used horses instead of tractors in those days. And there was one branch of the Hanna family that lived in our town, and they were really high class. They even had an English chauffeur, Mr. Saxon. and they had riding horses and all sorts of things. And of course, he would redo the riding horse, the shoe. And of course, there was so little to do in those days that going over and watching him shoe horses was a big thing. Of course, you know, it was kind of wonderful to watch because he would each horseshoe was hand fashioned to fit the hoof of that particular horse. I finally got to the point where I would get to hand him the nails, and then he would give me 15 cents to go down to Merkel Brothers General Store and get him a can of half and half tobacco. Half and half tobacco, pipe tobacco, was in a metal can that folded down as you as you emptied it. I don't know what great technological thing that was happening there, but there it was. And he would give me 15 cents for that. That was that was the first money I ever earned in my life. So living and my family was poor, and we didn't know it, or I didn't know it. I didn't, because we always ate well. However, my parents did manage to lose their home during the Depression, and this was because of something my father did. He mortgaged the house we lived in to buy a rental property in Cleveland, which was, I never figured out why he bought that particular property, because my father was definitely not a financial genius, because he did a lot of right things at the wrong time. My father was a chiropractor, and he always, if he could, he had another job of some kind to help support us. Sometimes he worked as a grocery salesman. That then he conned in one of his old customers on the west side of Cleveland into investing in a wholesale grocery operation. This was in 1935, I believe, and of course they sold sugar and flour and fillings for pastries. There were a lot of small bakeries in those days. Every neighborhood had several, really. And of course, these people, being self-employed, did not have a problem with the Depression either. The bakers, they lived over their bakery shop, and they baked at night, and then in the morning, they would go out and peddle the wares to different grocery stores in the area, and their wives would come down from upstairs and run the store in front. So there was a lot of interesting stuff going on. One of the things that crosses my mind is an interesting man. I met some interesting people through my father had an office in Cleveland. And then he also had he turned part of our house, the old summer kitchen in our house, into 2 rooms, which was his waiting room and his room where he did the adjustments on people. In those days, he had what they called a restricted, I guess you call it restricted, medical license. He had to take the same boards as the MDs in Columbus, Ohio, but he didn't have to take anything on surgery. And I guess he must have taken some because he was limited to minor surgery, whatever that is. But I don't remember he ever did any surgery. I'm digressing there, but it's part of my childhood, and I enjoy revisiting it. Anyway, this business that he invested in, or he didn't invest, he invested his knowledge in the other young fellow, the son of these grocers, had the money. And it was called Zavornik & King, and they had a delivery man, and he made $12 a week, and they had a girl that worked in the office, and she got $9 a week and a streetcar pass. So things went on, but this business failed. I think it was probably due to the fact my father was a great salesman, but he was not very good at collecting money. I can remember one time he sent me on a street. He gave me a streetcar ticket and to go and collect $5 from a guy. I guess the guy owed him for a sack of sugar, I guess it was. And the backup on that was extremely low. And I thought, you know, this is ridiculous. I'm going over there on the streetcar. I'm going to go both ways. It's going to cost me about 9 cents each way because you had these streetcar tickets that were 6 for half a buck. And he's going to make that much on that thing. It didn't make any sense to me. But my father was a terrible businessman. And, and I thought that was, after we lost our home in the Depression, we moved into the Polish neighborhood in Cleveland and had a big barn out back. And the business, having failed, he ran a business out of the barn selling flour, sugar, and I forget what else. At the time that they had the other plant, they had a coffee roasting machine in there. I remember taking a hoe and messing with the coffee after it came out of the roaster. It was on a kind of a mesh thing. I'm all over the place today, but it's fun. Back to the Depression. We don't learn by experience. During the time of Roosevelt's presidency, he did some things. He hired a man to clean up Wall Street and make rules restricting them. And guess who he hired? He hired a guy who got really wealthy selling short, who knew how to manipulate the stock market. Joe Kennedy. And he made all these rules because he knew what people were doing to go around what should be normal rules. And so we had these restrictions. Now, the restrictions worked over the years. But then just a short while back, what happened? Everybody started cheating on the rules. They were ignoring the rules, and they were encouraged by whoever was in office in Washington, D.C., to flaunt these rules. And guess what happened? We got our present recession because we were breaking the rules. You watch movies like Wall Street and these different things, and it's frightening because these people have no conscience and they don't care what they do. We are trying to get back under there, but this could have been a lot worse if we didn't have some of those restrictions and we didn't pull the rein on some of these people. We've had all these people that have been cheating us. That didn't cheat me because I didn't fall for their scams, but they were offering these huge interest rates, and of course it was a Ponzi scheme. You take in today and you pay out yesterday's with today's. People say that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. It is not. When they set Social Security up in 1935, at first it was arbitrary whether you joined or not. Or maybe that was only for people who had their own businesses, my father and his partner had. But I remember they were discussing whether they're going to get involved in it or not. But the Social Security called in some of the big insurance companies, underwriter people, and they set this program up. And it is sound if it's done right. What has unfortunately happened, and I don't think most people know this, that the money was taken over by the government. Instead of this money being out at high interest rates, or interest rates was prevailing at the time, it was loaned back to the government at simple 3 or 4%, I forget which was not the way it was supposed to be. It was supposed to go with the market. But be that as it may, we still have Social Security. I still have faith in it. I'm glad I have it. It's what I'm living off of right now. Being 90 years old, I've run out of money, and I'm living off of Social Security. And thank goodness I enjoyed some high wages, or some high income. And as a result, I have a fairly substantial amount of money coming in. Gosh, I can remember the first time I earned that amount of money that I get from Social Security. Of course, we had so darn much inflation that it eats into it terribly. But that was one of the many things we enjoyed. There's a book called Looking Backward, written by a man by the name of Edward Bellamy. And this was written in the around 1890, sometime in that area. And he looks back, he has, by some, not magic trick, but some trick of staying suspended in animation in old ruins until I think it's the year 2000. Now in 2000, and of course I realize this is not a practical solution. In 2000, we have become, as a result of the excesses of the 1890s in big business and industry, we have become a completely socialistic state where everybody gets the exact amount of income no matter what they do. I do not think this is a practical solution to the problem, but it's interesting. He predicts some of the things like radio, but he never talks about transportation. So everybody's always walking because they live within walking distance of their home, and they have this idyllic society where everybody is peaches and cream and light, and that's not the way people are. Some people are just kind of evil, and also some people just will live off the rest of us if they can. It was not a practical solution, but it was a reaction against what was going on at that time, which is exactly what was going on in 1929, and which was going on in a lesser fashion just recently. So I've got a minute left, I guess, and I've talked about this. How I happen to pick this subject is I have a large personal library, and I was going through the books, and I see this one. It's called The Big Change by Frederick Allen Lewis. Frederick Lewis Allen, rather. I'm sorry, trying to get you a plug there. And it has, I said this earlier, didn't I? It takes this for the first 50 years of this century. So it's not completely up to date, but it's interesting. People are always saying, they say that we shouldn't let the government interfere. We should have complete financial freedom from government interference. Well, think where we'd be if our government, with our money, hadn't loaned money to Chrysler, who turned their business around and paid back earlier than anticipated, and also General Motors. Just those two, just think of it. Because these places, the automobile industry is basic to our economy. We cannot live without the auto industry. It supplies too many jobs. Now, they're not squeaky clean. They send our manufacturing out of the town and out to Mexico and places like that. But there you have it. And my time is up, and I want to thank you for listening. I've had a good time this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed what I said. If you don't, you can reject it. That's okay, because I'm okay. And I hope that you always do, as my friend George says, accentuate the positive, because when you get into the negative, it's no good. Bye.